Hi, and welcome to this month's episode of the podcast. We are going to be meeting with the founder of In Touch Consulting. She is also the author of Wash, Withstand All Strife to Heal, Time to Do Your Laundry, and she runs a 4-week group periodically throughout the year. If you're interested in either purchasing the book or signing up for her group, you can check out her website to see when is the next time that she will be holding the group. And I, which will be different depending on when you might be watching this video or listening to the podcast. And so I want to give a trigger warning because the topic of suicide does come up later in the show. And I wanted to give a resource, which is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And so if you are having any thoughts of suicide and you feel like you need somebody to talk through, the phone number is 1-800-273-8255. There is also a crisis text line, which you can text the word home to 741-741. There's a lot of other crisis lines that I will also link. It's also on my website, Connected Family Services/crisis lines, and I will include all of those links in the bio. And so I just want to jump right into the interview, and I look forward to continuing to connect with you all. As I was reading your book, what I really love is that you map out like the steps that someone can take to really get through the healing process. And so I thought I haven't ever seen it kind of like mapped out in that way. It's just, and it's very direct and straightforward. And I really love that because I think in other books that I've read, it's kind of like given in pieces. And so like to have it like right there, and then you give the steps to kind of for someone to really work through it either on their own or with a therapist. And then I really love how you kind of, not kind of, but you related to washing laundry because I immediately resonated with it because for myself, I hate doing laundry. So there was one part in the book and I was like, you know what, that's so right. And it's so true, like how different things in our life can be like stains. And the longer we wait to deal with it, the harder it's going to be to get out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I wanted to ask for you was, what are your views on what it means to be vulnerable?
So, I think about this often because I think it's necessary. But I think being vulnerable is actually a sign of being brave, right? You
Mm-hmm.
are opening yourself up to sometimes criticisms and things that might come back in a negative way. So I think when you're vulnerable, you are, saying, this is me without all the covering, and I'm open, to newness, because I think that's also a part of being vulnerable. When you do that, because of what you may receive, you're opening yourself up to the possibility of newness, good or bad, but you're still opening yourself up to the possibility of newness. So, those are the two things that really come to mind when I think of a person being vulnerable.
Right. Yeah. And so what I've learned or seen is that like for many people, there's this idea that not, I don't know if we openly say it, but for some people, vulnerability is seen as a weakness. And so they will avoid it. And so
Yeah.
for you, like what are your thoughts on why that's so difficult to tap into for some
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. It's being vulnerable for some reason has been associated with being, weak, because I put my guard down
Mhm.
and, my defenses are, relaxed, and I'm vulnerable and I can be penetrated, because that's really what, being vulnerable is. You can be, if something's
Mm.
vulnerable, then it can be penetrated, and at its core, and it could be compromised. And it's like, people associate that with who you are as a person, right? But if I'm thinking about something that's top secret and it's, vulnerable, that means it's been compromised. But I don't think we should associate those things as people in the same way. But I think we do, right? And so people think if I'm vulnerable, I'm showing my weaker side, my softer side. And I don't know if that's necessarily how we should look at it, because it forces us to keep those defenses up. It forces us to keep some of the facades up, right? And some of those coverings, and not peel back those layers, because we want to make sure we got it on thick enough that we're not, penetrated. So I do think that people see it as a sign of weakness, but I think it could be really looked at as the opposite, honestly.
Right. Yeah. And so, I think about that like if that wall is up for some individuals who do have kind of like the stains of life,
Mhm.
I would imagine that that would have an impact on their healing process.
Absolutely.
So, when is it like safe to, I guess, be vulnerable in those situations when it comes time to wanting to heal or starting that process?
Yeah. So I think that, it's safe when, so let me just say this first.
Hmm.
I am a spiritual person.
Okay.
I don't compromise that. I have a relationship with God. I don't tell people who their God should be, but as I speak about it in the book, I do believe that you should have something that you believe in that is higher than you, right?
Mm, right.
Because when man fails you, and they will, not man, male, but when man fails you, and they will, you have to have something else to believe in, something else to lean on. And so, I just think, for me, tapping into that relationship and looking for guidance and direction, is what has helped me to know when it's okay to be vulnerable. I also, look at, for those who are blessed enough to have support system, when you are able to identify that person that you can go to, then it is a safe space. It doesn't have to be a family member. It can be your clinician. It can be a support group. It can be your person at the gym, your trainer. So I'm very clear in saying I don't think people should box themselves into needing traditional therapy.
Mm,
But your
right.
safe space has to be where you know that you're going to be supported. I don't recommend that people who are willing, ready to go and be vulnerable, that they go stand at the top of, a building and shout out all of the things that they've gone through, because who's there to support you? There's no one there to talk this through. And then you're left in a room kind of by yourself to deal with these things. So I would say, it's safe when you've identified some sort of support system. We all need it. And it does not have to be, traditional therapy, because I know that people still struggle with that. So I would never want a person, to not try to embark on, this journey because they haven't found the right clinician.
Right.
So,
You touched on something that I do or address on a regular basis. And there's this idea, because a lot of times people will say to me, like, I don't have a support system, or, I'm doing this all on my own. And I am constantly, constantly pushing, we have to build you a support system
mhm.
because, you know, my belief is that we can have the individual person, but like when we have healthy connections, we're
Yeah,
going to do so much better. And
yes,
so sometimes we have to create that support
yeah,
system. Sometimes we have to go out and seek, like, what's in my community, what is, and I do, I'm a therapist, but I do not believe, and I literally just had this conversation like 2 hours ago where it was just like, sometimes that help is going to be outside of the therapy room because I'm only
yeah,
meeting with you for an hour.
yeah,
So, like, then you have the rest of your week where, because someone said to me that they struggled because we decreased our sessions. And I'm like, you know
yeah.
what? That means that I haven't done my job because I don't want you to
Mhm,
rely on me only. Right.
mhm,
And so then we talked about building up that support system. So,
Yeah.
me taking responsibility for that as well.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
interesting you say that because um, I am more drawn to uh, group therapy,
Mm.
right? I don't really like individual therapy. And so by, profession, I'm not a practicing clinician, although I have my master's in counseling psychology, and that's exactly where I thought I was going to go um, until my first year of graduate school. And I was like, I don't want to sit in a room all day and ask people, how did that make you feel? I was
Hmm.
like, I would rather work with individuals to help them administratively. So, but I really, really, really prefer group over individual.
Yeah.
Group, the dynamics of group and the different personalities, people having the opportunity to see that even though they thought that they were the only one, someone else in that group will share
Hmm.
and they'll realize it wasn't just me. They have an opportunity to build and to bond. So the most recent workshop series that we did in January, on Saturday, the last Saturday that the group met, these people did not know, well, half of the people in the room I didn't even know. So I was grateful that they connected, through my social media, but they all exchanged phone numbers at the end,
Hmm.
from Atlanta to New York
Wow.
to Pittsburgh. So these aren't even people who live in the same city, but they built a connection just by being in that group together,
Right.
and understanding that they didn't have to do it alone. And for me, I was like, my job was done. Like,
Right.
after this, they were able to connect with each other, and they can support each other outside of me. And
Right.
so, yeah, yeah, that group work is golden. It really is. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And you just put me in some accountability because I've been wanting to start groups, but I keep putting it off. So now I have a little bit of accountability.
That's
That's
right.
the,
Get
because
it
I'm always,
done.
yeah, yep. I'm always talking about like connections, but then it's like, if I'm only doing individual therapy, then it is a disservice because then
Yeah.
it's like, I'm not helping them to practice what we're actually like learning
Yeah.
in the individual therapy. So, well, thank
Yeah.
you. We made a connection, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
uh so I wanted to talk a little bit about laundry, right?
Mhm.
When is it time, I guess, like how does someone know that they should start their laundry? And I guess that kind of like also taps into the vulnerability as I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it. But what are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are, when you see your relationships changing, it's
Mm,
time to do some work, right? When you see that you're changing, it's time to do some work. I talk about it, in the book. I talk about when there is a stench and people
mm,
don't want to be around you. And when you're not getting invited to stuff, you hear about it later. When you're not on the group chats, you might want to look at those relationships. One, look at if they're serving you, right?
mhm,
Or if it's something that you need to do some work on. And it's, so let me just be clear, it may not be work necessarily in a bad way. You may have outgrown that space with those people, but nonetheless, you still have some sort of work to do, right? So I would say, one, if you notice changes in yourself. So if you're in a relationship, whether it's an intimate relationship or not, and you notice that you are compromising beyond your own principles and values, then you kind of need to go back and look and see the things that inside of you that's even allowing you, to accept some of those things and do some of those things. If you notice relationships with family members that are eliciting some sort of uncomfortable feelings inside, you may need to go back and kind of look at what those relationships were really like as you were growing up, and if this is some work you need to do, inside. Because we like to brush stuff under the rug, right?
right.
We got some family secrets out there, and let me tell you something. People uh people will continue to brush them under the rug until it kind of starts to come out in negative behavior. So, I would definitely say if you see, yourself changing, right?
Right.
Your own principles and values being impacted, or if you see your relationships changing, you definitely need to look at, okay, I may have a couple stains I need to deal with.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like once we start to change a little bit, and our relationships change, we feel it. We feel when things are uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We feel sometimes, the thing I struggle with though is that sometimes people feel uncomfortable in unhealthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I just kind of like thought about that, about like how sometimes people may not know uh when those relationships need to kind of like be washed, those stains need to be washed. So I just kind of like thought about that, um
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of some unhealthy patterns are normalized in society. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm thinking also when things don't feel good, because we kind of like know, even
Mm-hmm.
though it might be normalized, we know like when something is hurting us, and we know like when it's causing like more damage down the road. But
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
you may not be able to identify those things specifically, but I'm a firm believer,
Right.
what doesn't make you feel good. You know what, hurts you, whether it's normalized or not, you still feel it.
Right. Right. I so I want to switch the topic a little bit. um so there was the topic of suicidality that came up in the book, and for myself reading that, knowing that um it was a woman that looked like me that wrote it, I felt like um a weight lift.
Hmm.
And so I was just like, wow, like I don't think we talk about that.
Right.
And
Right.
so uh sometimes what I'm seeing right now, so before I even say that, I'm going to say the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for anybody that is listening to this, if it is triggering, that they know that there are resources out there. And so because that's something that is coming up a lot, but for those that need it, the number is 1-800-273-8255. And so the reason why I give that is because sometimes people are triggered, and then again they have these emotions and they're not sure what to do with it, and it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, like with connections and support. So there's other kind of like, if the therapist isn't available and we can't get to a therapist right now, but we need kind of like that support, it is okay to call. And so with
Absolutely.
that being said, I do, again, I appreciate that the topic was discussed in the room, because I don't think that um, we talk about some of the more serious topics. A lot of it is like, oh, we need self-care, we need prayer, which is important. It's all important. But I think there's these more difficult and underlying topics that people are dealing with, but we're just not
Yeah.
talking about it. And so
Yeah.
um, I first wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on the difference between, because I hear the words being used interchangeably. And so I just wanted to kind of like address that first. So like, what are your thoughts on what is the difference between suicidality and suicide?
So it's interesting because when I saw that, I thought, I don't know how people are using them
Mm,
interchangeably. The suicidality is actually the thought of,
mm,
and maybe the discussion of suicide. Suicide is the actual act of. So I think I was a little I was wondering what rooms you were in
mm,
that people were using it interchangeably, because from my perspective, it's not interchangeable. One is the thought of, and one is the act of. So I don't see how it's interchangeably used
right.
that way. And I was interested because I was like, oh, maybe she'll shed some light on that for me, because I I honestly I don't see them that way.
Right. You know what? And I think it's because for us as like professionals who kind of like deal with it on a, I wouldn't say everyday basis, but like it
Mhm.
comes up in conversation. And so I think that for myself at least, it's become a habit to talk about, right? Like I wouldn't say it's comfortable,
Yeah.
but it's habit to talk about it. And so like certain things and topics come very easy to me. And
Mm-hmm.
so not easy. I always try to be careful about the words because words matter, right? But I think that for some people that are not that are not maybe aware of like what certain things mean,
Mm-hmm.
they might not be saying things in the right way.
Right.
So
Right.
like something that I just kind of like spoke up about was people saying the idea, they would say that this person died, no, this person committed suicide. And so I kind of like just stepped in and said, you know, when we say that, it is putting the blame on the person and not
Mm-hmm.
the fact that
Mm-hmm.
they were depressed. So like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we try to move towards saying this person died by suicide. And so,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so really
Yeah.
it's more for like clarification for
Yeah.
individuals who might, they might be dealing with these things, but they might not be aware, right? And separating
Right.
thoughts from action. So that's a part
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
therapy that we do. So it's like I'm having these thoughts, but this is the behavior of it. And so I think that
Mhm.
separating it will allow um people to be able to talk about it more and not
Mhm.
just shy away from it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's good. And you spoke up on Clubhouse?
Yes, because
Yeah, that's good.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
it's
yeah.
interesting. Sorry.
No.
It's interesting because probably since the day that I met you, I may be on there like once a week and I actually go into a room. Um I, I've well, I'm busy, first of all,
Mhm.
but second of all, um, there's just a lot of conversations that I think there's a lot of experts, I'll say that, on there. And so, I don't feel like coming on stage and trying to correct you. And, everyone behind a microphone and a created bio can be the expert. And, so I'm just mindful of that. And
Right.
so yeah, I'm glad you spoke up and said something, because I see a lot of mental health rooms on Clubhouse. It's, Black mental health, Black children mental health, but, I see a lot of that. So I'm glad you did speak up. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
And
sure.
honestly, I definitely keep myself off of there as much as I can, only because going on there, I started noticing that my anxiety was through the roof. And I was like, why is my stomach hurting like this? But it's because even in that same room, after I had spoke up, the guy a guy told me that I should be checking on people, and I was like, I didn't say this, but I'm like, I can't do that and hold a job and take care of myself. I was
Mm,
like, I'm only providing the resources so that like if somebody does click on my bio, then at least they'll know like that these resources are out there. Like it would be
mhm,
a disservice to myself and the clients that I serve for me to try to save the world. And so
mm. How
yeah, but
about that?
what'd you say?
I said, how about that? Yeah, you
Yeah,
can't save the world.
right. Yeah, but when that topic came up, I was just kind of like, because I was there and I knew that there were so many people listening, and I was like, I think that because we aren't separating things and talking about them
Mhm.
in the way that they should be, uh, then I didn't want to be there and not say anything. But I
Right.
definitely think there's uh kind of like needing to be, which I think that's conversations that's going on as well, like what's happening on this app right now,
Hmm.
because it's very new. And
Yeah.
people, like you said, anybody could be behind those accounts.
Yeah.
So for sure, yeah. But thank you
Yeah.
for your input, and also just saying like just separating, like one is the thought and one is the act, and going from there. But
Yeah.
so speaking about that, right? That's kind of like leading into the next thing. So For me, I have seen that suicidality is not something that discriminates based on race or any other factor. Uh, what are your ideas on like why in the Black community it is so hard to talk about? And I think like the room that I was in was about Black mental health, and it was, like I said, obvious that people weren't able to kind of like uh separate the differences. And so
Mhm.
do you have any ideas about like why it might be difficult in the Black community versus others?
I think it goes back to the perception that we are not weak, right?
Mm,
And the idea of even thinking about taking your own life says that you were not able to handle whatever it was that you were presented with, no matter how heavy the weight or the burden, may be. By you considering that may indicate that you are weak. And I think because we have been held and expected to be strong for so long, we don't even know when there is that little space that we have, that little bit of space that we may have to be vulnerable and to just be and to receive help and support, because for some reason we think we have to always do it on our own, right? And we can't get help, we can't ask for help. And um it's really it's I will say that some of the historical happenings for us have really done tremendous has had a tremendous impact on our psyche. It
mm,
really has. It has, um, in some respects, it's upside down in the way that we think. I think, in my experience, we are, you know, by nature in history, people of community, but so many things that have happened historically has kind of severed those things. And so we now feel that we have to hold everything up, and we really don't. We should hold each other up, we really should, but we don't have to do it on our own. So I think that it's really hard, because we already know, here's the other piece, that in so many cases we are already behind the eight ball, right? We're behind in, we're not behind in basketball or football or, music or whatever, we're not behind on that type of thing. But the power and the control of those industries, we are behind. And so if we're struggling, we can't take the chance of anyone knowing that we're struggling, because that's going to put us further behind. Right. And we already see that we don't necessarily have a seat at the table. So if we say that we're struggling, we need help, we're thinking about taking our own life, they're going to take our seat from the table. We can't sit at the table because we're a liability now. So
mm,
it's just like it's done a lot to our psyche.
right.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really has.
I appreciate like how passionate you are, and I could see um the kind of like underlying of the importance of the book that you created, and also, thinking about like I the fact that this is coming from someone who cares so much about individuals just being well and being
Mhm,
able to
mhm.
move out of those dark places.
Yeah,
That's how
yeah,
I'm perceiving it. Like
yeah,
your passion,
absolutely.
all of that went into that book.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. I did not struggle with sharing that story,
Mhm.
right? That was also freeing for me because the experience was freeing for me. Um, but after the book came out, the number of people that I encountered that didn't just have the thoughts of suicide, but actually attempted and then died by suicide was just, but they felt comfortable, right? And so just a story. I went back to, what I consider my home church. I went back to my home church, and one of the deacons, we saw each other, we made eye contact. I went down, and because it's like home for me. So we're hugging, and she's like, "What you been up to?" I was like, "Oh, I just wrote a book." She's like, "Oh, are you here to promote it?" I was like, "No, no, So as I started talking about the book, and I started talking about that particular piece, her face went
Mm-hmm.
blank. And then her husband's face went blank. And I didn't know what was going on because I haven't been there for a while. And she said, my son committed suicide
Oh,
last year. That's what she said to me.
right,
And I didn't.
right.
And I was like, wow. So she was able to have that conversation, right? Fast forward to about a month later, I saw another young lady I hadn't seen in a while. I saw her in a pharmacy. We talked for a little bit. She's like, "I have to get the book." I said, "I always keep a copy on me." So we went to my car. She purchased the book. We started having the conversation, and she too went blank.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "I tried to kill myself last year in October." She said, "I got drunk and drove my car into a wall." And that, like, my heart just dropped
Right,
because I was like, wow. Like, first, you have that moment of being grateful, like, it didn't go further than the thoughts for me. But then it gets even more intense because you think about the people that it actually did, and that I know that they're not the only two, just like I knew I wasn't the only one,
right.
right? It's yeah, there's people out there that's hurting. There really is. And they're getting up every day, and they're living life, and they're doing what they have to do every day to survive. And inside they're just dying. They come home and they're like a mess. I know because I was that person. So
Yeah. And I think like I kind of like what I said at the beginning, for me to see that in a book and writing and to see your picture on the back, like for me, that was this weight that was lifted. And
yeah.
so, you know, just by simply sharing your story, I see it touched me. Um, and from what you're saying, it's like this moment, I guess, of not feeling alone
Mm-hmm.
where just talking about it is being normalized. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so then,
Yeah. Mm,
and I think
yeah.
that's kind of like the piece where for so many people in those moments, they feel alone and they feel like they're a burden. Um,
Mm,
and I think just hearing like, there are other people as well that are also going through kind of like the same things. And so
yes.
there is life after kind of like past that moment for some people that are able to kind of like process through it or
Yeah.
to make it through that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure.
For you, I guess like this wasn't this is a little bit different, but like what are your I guess like do you have like words for someone who might be, I guess, wanting to get to the other side
Hmm.
of that
Um,
trauma?
I would say, so when you say get to the other side, you mean, doing the actual work or?
Hmm. Like doing the
Yeah.
work and then being well.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah. So I mean, I'll be honest with you. Um, I just encourage people to start talking, you
mhm,
know, um, and identifying, you know, those things that they know have hurt them. And I know it sounds simple, but I can be like, I don't know anything else but to and that's part of just me, right? I don't know the fluff of it. It's like, this is because I need you to not play in the pillowy too long,
mhm,
right? There may be some thorns on this other side, but if you stay over here, you won't make it to the other side because you'll think everything is is pillowy and soft and, you know, euphoric, and there's just this bright pretty light. No, there's some thorns over here, and there's some things that's going to hurt you, but I promise you, when you go through those things, that you will become better. You'll have the scars, you'll have the scrapes, but it is to make you better. But as long as you stay in this little pillowy thing, and that's just me, right? That's probably also why I didn't go into actually, you know, once graduate school was over, I was like, "Ah, I don't want to go get my PsyD. I was like, I'm not interested in this. I don't want to get, you know, an LPC because this is not how I want to do the work, right? Um, I and I knew that for me. And I think it's important that people know um, you have a responsibility in this work as a helping professional, right? And so you have to know if your approach might be, you know, a little bit too rigid or you know, straightforward for people. You have to understand that. So when I came back into the work in the way I do it now with Wash, people know straight out the gate. They know that's Maisha. You might not like it, but this is what it is. And she's going to give you whatever it is. She's going to let you sit in it for a little bit, but then she's going, you got to move. You can't stay here forever. Right.
Right.
Um, so, I mean, honestly, just to start having those conversations. And I tell people all the time, you don't have to give me everything at once. That was the whole idea in the book. I said, don't put, you know, and I'm always like going back, like, didn't I tell you, did you read? So it's funny because whenever, you know, I'm having conversations,
Hmm.
I'll say, did you read the book? And they'll be like, well, I can't. I'm like, yeah, I know you didn't, because I said in the book, it's not all one load. You ain't gonna put everything in the same load. You have to have separate loads for reasons, because they have different things that need to be addressed, and some things are more severe than others. So, you know, I get it. You're not going to address everything all at once, but you're not going to be able to move unless you start talking about it.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I love
yeah.
that. And I love this idea that like there's this resource that I will be recommending to people today.
Thank you.
There's this resource out there that you can use as like that a person can use as kind of like a guide. A lot of people um have like a lot of uncertainty about like what the healing process
Yeah,
is or should look like, and it's going to look different for every person. But what I
absolutely.
like that you said is that it's not going to be fluff. It's not going to be fluff, like the real work, like and I think that's kind of like the thing with like the whole self-care movement, which again, very important. But I think we mask it as like self-care is, taking just a hot bath and then everything's gonna be okay.
Right,
Sometimes,
right.
we need that hot bath. Sometimes we
Yeah.
need, that we need different things to help us feel good in that moment. But unless the work is done, we're gonna keep trying to like get these little pieces of healing or being healed, and it's not going
Mhm.
to fully get there until the work is done. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right. Self-care is such a movement right now. It's interesting. And I believe, like, yeah, we all need it. And it looks different for everyone, right? Self-care for me is literally watching mindless TV.
Right.
That's self-care for me, right?
Hmm.
I go get my nails done, I'll go get my, you know, hair retightened, but my real self-care is not being around anyone, you know.
Right.
But for some people it's going out and hanging out. That's their
Hmm.
self-care. So it's different for everyone.
Yeah, and it's important. I think it's a piece, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the kind of like thing that people get stuck is like, oh, I'm doing my self-care, but I'm not feeling better. But it's just a small piece of it, and that's the
Yeah, I think we also have made a lot of things trendy, right? So it's
yeah.
trendy to say my therapist said,
Mm,
or self care. I'm going to take a little self care. It's some things have become trendy. It's the real work is not behind it, right? So you're not really looking at what that self care is doing, or is it just a reason to say you're going to go get, you know, your nails done, or, you know, going out to eat or whatever, you know, then now what? Okay, you look pretty, you're full, now what? Because you still went home to the mess.
mm-hmm.
So
Right, right. It's like, when do we want to stop that cycle?
mm-hmm,
I like that. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that is all that I have. Um,
Okay.
is there anything that else that you want to like say or add? I have kind of like I talked to you about the other stuff, but is there anything else that you want to like say or add in?
No, I just would encourage people to not be afraid.
Hmm.
We often we are there's the fear of the unknown, and what if I start to do this work? What will it look like on the other side? What relationships will I lose? Um, but just trust in the process. That it's really to grow you as a person.
Hmm.
Um, and not being fearful of the things that might occur as a result of you may lose some relationships, but most of the time if you look back, those relationships didn't necessarily serve you, or else they wouldn't be in jeopardy of you losing them. So I just think it's important that we are not fearful, um
Or doing
understanding
it.
it's what did you say?
I'm so sorry. I said, or doing it anyway, scared, doing it scared.
Yeah, do it scared, understanding that this move could be lonely, right? But you don't have to be alone. You can still, engage folks, but just not those that are not, you know, positive for you. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Um, well, thank you so much. I really enjoy connecting with you.
It was good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad we connected.
And
Yeah.
I'm really thankful for your book. I am going to put the links for your website in the bio of this podcast, and so
Okay.
everything will be there so that people can go right ahead and purchase it or link it. I often recommend like books to my clients that have resonated with me that I think will help. So
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
All right. I hope you have a good night, and
Good.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Be safe.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.